Timothy Alberino is the best-selling author of Birthright, The Coming Posthuman Apocalypse, and the Usurpation of Adam's Dominion on Planet Earth. In it, he offers a unique perspective on humanity's history and also looks at some of the most alarming data about where humanity is heading, especially when it comes to an extraterrestrial presence which is not benign, which he believes is going to be integral to the imposition of the transhumanist agenda.
You are listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla, your source for the uncensored truth regarding the human, extraterrestrial, global, and political agenda. Click the like button and subscribe to this channel. And now, here's Dr. Michael Salla.
Well, welcome back to Exopolitics Today, Timothy.
Thank you so much for having me back on.
Well, I just finished reading your book, which was truly fascinating, very well written, very well researched, a lot of really good data. You were able to combine looking at ancient history and some of the more recent information concerning the extraterrestrial presence, especially when it comes to the abduction phenomenon and transhumanism. So I just want to congratulate you on really integrating all those elements so in such an interesting way.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you for saying that.
Well, I would like to just set the scene for what you wrote about in terms of where we are as a planetary civilization, given what's happening with the extraterrestrial presence and with transhumanism, by kind of like going back to the beginning in terms of humanity's creation and the involvement of different gods or extraterrestrials. And originally, in our first interview, you talked about this golden age where there was these extraterrestrials that ruled directly over humanity, and you described how that was a positive for the contemporaries at the time, but as far as the ancient Hebrews were concerned, they kind of envisaged that in a more negative light. So you also talk about an elder race, that the elder race, in whose image humanity was created, is involved. So you want to just explain where the elder race fit in and who are the Elohim?
Okay. Well, this is going to be very theological, obviously. So I have some common ground with ancient astronaut theory. The common ground I have with that particular theory is I believe and I affirm that the Hebrew Bible portrays a situation in which mankind has been in direct contact with extraterrestrial entities since his conception. And that may seem to your audience a very mundane declaration, but to Christians around the world, that would be a shocking statement that would ring in their ears in a way that would be to some degree uncomfortable. But this is in fact the narrative of the Bible, the narrative of the Hebrew scriptures. Mankind has been in contact with extraterrestrials since the beginning. These extraterrestrials are ambiguously denominated as angels in the Hebrew text. Angel simply means messenger in both Greek and Hebrew. In Greek, it's angelos. In Hebrew, it's malach. It's just a messenger and envoy, one who is sent. But we get a more profound understanding of who these beings are by some of the other terminology that's used to describe them, such as the sons of God. And we know because of the book of Job, which is probably the oldest book in the Hebrew Bible. The book of Job declares that the sons of God shouted for joy. The B'nai Elohim shouted for joy when the earth was created, when the foundations of the earth were laid. So these entities are certainly pre-existent. They pre-exist mankind, and they are most definitely extraterrestrial. Obviously, the word extraterrestrial means not of this earth. a being whose provenance, whose origin is not planet Earth. And it doesn't matter whether we're talking the cosmos, whether we're talking another planet, or whether we're talking another dimension. If an entity has an origin other than planet Earth, then it is by definition extraterrestrial. And so these beings that we call angels, that we're familiar with in the biblical text, are certainly extraterrestrial. So that is, I think, an area of commonality that I have with many people, many researchers in the UFO field, in the UFO space. And again, it's a commonality I also have with ancient astronaut theory, although I part ways with ancient astronaut theory and on several different important points. So we can establish right off the bat, from a biblical worldview, that mankind has indeed been in contact with extraterrestrials who have had a great deal of influence, both positive and negative, on his development throughout the millennia.
Where does the actual elder race fit into that, and the Elohim? Because we're talking about extraterrestrials being associated with humanity pretty much from the get-go. Of course, those familiar with the Anunnaki or the Sumerian literature, they would say, well, that's because the extraterrestrials created humanity. Whereas, of course, in Hebrew, there is some Hebrew scriptures that refers to the Elohim, and of course, there's the big controversy over, Elohim. Are we talking about a singular absolute deity, or are we talking about a plurality of gods, like Paul Wallace and people like that argue?
You're talking about, again, within the context of the Hebrew Bible, you're talking about a king and his council. That's the language of the Elohim. It's this divine council, as Michael Heiser puts it, Dr. Michael Heiser, the late Michael Heiser. It's a divine council. In other words, just like earthly kingdoms, there would have a king, and then that king would have a council and a court, and courtiers and messengers and so forth. I contend that human governance, that our kingdoms, that our, even our, to some extent, our political systems, that we didn't invent them, we inherited them. That a kingdom pre-existed us and indeed exists still, and is the primary force in the universe. And that this kingdom is governed by a king, a supreme being, and this king has a council. And so in the Hebrew text, when the word Elohim is employed, it's used for all different kinds of things. Elohim sometimes is used to refer to Yahweh. It's sometimes used to refer to just celestial beings, heavenly beings. So in the beginning of Genesis, when we read, "Let us create man in our image," much ado has been made about that, the plurality, and rightly so. It is a plural, "Let us create man in our image." And it's a very simple explanation. And the explanation is that it is the king and his council. It's a deliberation between the king and his council, among the king and his council, this decision to create a new species. However, the prerogative, the actual act of creating, is done by, rather, the act of creating is the prerogative of the king of the council, because according to the biblical text, the king of the council is the Son of God, and he is delineated from the rest of these heavenly beings, in that he is the very maker of the universe. In fact, I call him the singularity. He is the Big Bang. The New Testament describes him as that. The New Testament declares that all things were created through him and by him and for him, and in him all things consist. So the Son of God is just not another being, celestial entity among these other celestial entities. He is the supreme Son. He is the preeminent Son. He is the creator, the maker of heaven and earth and all that is. And his counsel is subject to him. And so this plurality of language does not necessarily indicate that you have a bunch of gods that are equal in status. Rather, you have a supreme being and who is ruling over these other gods, these other celestial beings, who are, for all intents and purposes, who are gods, and are called such in the biblical text. But it's better to think of them as these are an elder race of beings that were created a very long time ago, who knows how long ago, and who pre-exist mankind, and are, again, according to the book of Psalms, according to David, we were created a little bit lower than these beings in terms of our physiology and in terms of our capabilities. We were created to be a little bit lower than these beings. So they pre-exist us, and they surpass us in terms of their physiology. But make no mistake about it, there is a supreme being who governs all others, and to whom these beings, these Elohim, are subject. And the ones that are not subject to him are in a state of rebellion. And these would be the insurrectionary sons of God, the apostate sons of God. And again, this is all within the context of the universe, and extraterrestrial world, extraterrestrial entities who were inhabiting this kingdom before we ever showed up on the scene of planet Earth.
Well, I mean, what you've described fits in very well also with the Enuma Elish, which is the oldest creation story from ancient Sumer. And it describes exactly something very similar, that there was an assembly of deities, of gods, Elohim, whatever you want to call them, and that there was a king, the leader, and that they decided to create humans, that humans were a product of that assembly, discussing the need for the creation of this race. And they also talk about a rebellion, and they talk about the rebellion of a race or a subset of the Anunnaki called the Igigi. So there you have very similar elements to what you described. Now in the Book of Enoch, it refers to the leader, or this king of the heavens, as the Ancient of Days. Of course, in the Sumerian texts, it refers to him as Anu. The Hebrews refer to him as Yahweh. Are we talking about the same being, or are they different beings?
Well, as we discussed last time, I think it's a mistake to think that the Sumerian text is the first text, the original text. I think that the original texts on which all of these ancient texts are based is prehistoric. There are texts and stories, oral traditions, and written accounts that predate the Hebrew account and the Sumerian account that come to us from the world before the cataclysm, the antediluvian world. And so we would expect to find similarities in these accounts and others if they're all based on the same story. And we would also expect to find the variations in the story and in the characters and in the details, because it's not as if the Sumerian text came first and then the Hebrew text was based on the Sumerian text, or the Egyptian accounts were based on the Sumerian accounts. Rather, all of them are drawing from prehistoric documents and stories, oral traditions. And so the source, we should look to the source of these stories, not in Sumer, rather in the world before the great cataclysm. That would be my viewpoint on the source material.
And we talked about the Book of Enoch as
Right.
being that text that does have that kind of unambiguous connection to this pre-flood world. And that there's a reference to that being handed down. Now, one of the things that I find fascinating in the Book of Enoch, and I wanted you to maybe elaborate on this, is that of course it describes Enoch being taken into the heavens, seeing the different realms of the angels, positive angels, negative, fallen angels, and so forth. And it describes him going through an anointment process. Now, I wonder if that anointment process, and others have commented on this, that in fact, actually, that anointment process that Enoch underwent while he was traveling through the heavens is nothing other than him actually going through a decontamination process as he enters into the different ships that are piloted by the extraterrestrials. That, we're not talking about some ethereal heaven. We're talking about Enoch being a contactee, being taken to the ships of these extraterrestrials and going through a decontamination process, and eventually meeting with the leader, the king of the extraterrestrials, or of the angels.
Well, the Book of Enoch is divided into two portions, really two main portions. The beginning is called the Book of the Watchers, and the Book of the Watchers is written as a historical narrative, and that's what we talked about last time. That details the activity of the Watchers and their progeneration of hybrid giants on Earth with human women and so forth. And then after that, you get the parables of Enoch, in which Enoch is relating dreams and visions. So it's visionary content, much like the content of the Old Testament that was written by the various prophets. It's very, very much a perceptual experience that Enoch begins to have and record. And so I wouldn't take, after the Book of the Watchers, all the material that comes after the Book of the Watchers within the Book of Enoch. I would say is very heavily metaphoric. It's symbolic. Again, it's in the context of dreams and visions and parables. There may be some experiences in there that Enoch actually had, in terms of actually, I mean, physically was somewhere other than Earth. But I doubt it. I think that it's very much written in the way that, again, the Old Testament, the books of the Old Testament prophets, it's the same kind of language, the same kind of figures of speech and metaphor and symbolism. And so I would say that all of that material is subject to interpretation, because it's prophetic iconography.
Very interesting. Well, I have kind of gone over the three books of Enoch, and we talked about that last time. In the second book of Enoch, the Slavonic book of Enoch, it actually describes Enoch being given forewarning that he would be taken off planet, or he would be taken into the heavens for a period of time, and that he would, and then when he would come back, he would have so much time to write up everything, and then he would leave again. So that's the second, book of Enoch. So I think it's, to me, when I read that, it's describing an extraterrestrial contact experience.
It very well may be, but you have to keep in mind that the second Enoch and third Enoch are definitively dated to after Christ, to after the time of Christ. So after the 1st century AD. Whereas the first book of Enoch, there are many scholars who would date at least the beginning portion of that book would be BC, and there are also scholars who would say that the entire document, the entire manuscript of First Enoch, the provenance is BC. It's before Christ. So that's an important delineation between those books. The reason why it's so important is because one thing that First Enoch does that is remarkable, absolutely remarkable, is it contains messianic content that can only pertain to Jesus of Nazareth. And in fact, much of the content of First Enoch provides foundational material for what's written in the New Testament by the New Testament writers. And so it's some of the most astounding messianic prophecies. You find them in First Enoch, clearly referring to this man, Jesus of Nazareth, who would be born hundreds, if not thousands of years after these things were written. That distinguishes First Enoch from Second Enoch and Third Enoch. Again, it's very important to keep that in mind. Second Enoch, Third Enoch were written after the birth of Christ in the 1st, 2nd, 3rd centuries AD. Now, but does Second Enoch and Third Enoch describe some sort of contact with extraterrestrial beings? Well, I would go back to reiterate what I said in the beginning, that the biblical text that that we're all familiar with describes this kind of contact with extraterrestrial beings. And I do believe that when we talk about in the biblical text, when we encounter these vehicles of conveyance called chariots of fire, or the chariots of God, or the chariots of Israel, all of these things are referencing the same kind of vehicles. What we're talking about are not flying chariots with, flying horses. What we're talking about are advanced aerospace vehicles. And so certainly the Hebrews were encountering advanced beings, extraterrestrial beings, who were employing these vehicles of conveyance, these advanced aerospace vehicles. I would certainly confirm that. Now, whether or not the second Enoch or third Enoch is actually describing that, I don't know. Most of my familiarity is with first Enoch, although I have read second and third Enoch, but they're sort of jumbled together in my mind, the contents of those two manuscripts.
One of the things that kind of like emerges from all three books of Enoch is that Enoch is this really incredible figure in the antediluvial world and in the kind of like post-flood world as well, because he was the one that received the wisdom from the heavens, from the different extraterrestrial fleets, if you want to go down that path, and that he was able to then relay that onto his son Methuselah, who then kind of like preserved the wisdom for the post-flood world. Now, this raises the question, is Enoch a Hebrew translation of the Egyptian term Thoth, who is the Egyptian god of wisdom? And he also has this kind of very long lineage, and some have equated Enoch and Thoth. So, so is this really where the Hebrew and the Egyptian and the Sumerian kind of like worldview kind of like merge together?
Yeah, I think so. I think we are looking at the same characters. I think the antediluvian patriarchs are recast in these stories, but the defining attributes are preserved. The names may change and the details may change, but the defining attributes are preserved. And again, this goes back to the idea that all of these stories are drawing upon the same sources, but because of cultural differences and other reasons, different languages and so forth, the names and it's kind of like a game of telephone. The information being passed down through the generations, some of the information being lost, some of it being purposely changed or altered in some way. But I think there's very clearly a link between these characters especially through, let's say, the ancient Egyptians, the Sumerians and Akkadians, and the Hebrews. Very, very strong link between those cultures. And in fact, it could be said that all of these cultures, including the Hebrews, are fundamentally Mesopotamian, even Egypt. They all came from the Fertile Crescent. They all came from the same area, which I think is where civilization began to reemerge after the cataclysm that destroyed the world. And so it seems to me that we should expect to find a lot of similarities between these cultures.
Yes, exactly. And one of the things that is very intriguing is when we look at the Sumerian kings list and the reign of the different pharaohs described by Manetho concerning Egypt, and compare that to the Hebrew texts about the age of the patriarchs. I mean, the Sumerian kings list describes how the gods, the original gods, lived for like tens of thousands of years. The demigods lived for like roughly 1,000 years, and then humans lived for kind of like the conventional 70-year period. And of course, in the Hebrew Bible, you have something very similar, where you have the patriarchs, Adam, Seth, Jared, Enoch, Methuselah, Noah, all living up to close to 1,000 years.
That's right.
So, does that mean that the patriarchs, again, is just a rebranding. Those patriarchs are rebranding of kind of like demigods, as in the day, all these figures, all these patriarchs, Jared, Enoch, would have been considered demigods.
They were certainly revered, yes. And there is an overlay. There is an overlay between the Sumerian kings list and the Hebrew patriarchs, pre-flood patriarchs. And it is very intriguing. And I know that there is some dispute among the ancient Near East scholars regarding those ages in the Sumerian texts, because it's a dispute over the zeros, how many zeros are actually attached to those lifespans. And in fact, there's a dispute in regard to the biblical account as well, because the Septuagint adds 100 years to the lifespans. Well, I should say that the Masoretic text, the one that we're all familiar with, the one that almost every Bible in the world is derived from, subtracts 100 years from the lifespans of the patriarchs. And so there's a lot of dispute over both among ancient Near Eastern scholars regarding both the Sumerian lifespans of the kings list and also the patriarchs, the biblical patriarchs, but certainly they overlay. I mean, setting aside the fact that the Sumerian, you're talking about thousands and thousands of years, the patriarchs overlay, and it's almost a 1-to-1 when you compare the kings to the patriarchs.
Yes, I think it's very important because I think it has implications also for what you later described in your book in terms of human longevity. I mean, these lifespans of the patriarchs, Adam, Seth, Jared, is that part of the human birthright, or is that something that was just unique to them, and that this 70, 80 years lifespan of normal humans is all we can expect?
Well, in the biblical narrative, there's a point at which God actually declares that the lifespan of mankind would be reduced to 120 years, and then it gets down to 70. But I believe that the reason why we see these long lifespans in the antediluvian world is because you're closer to the source. You're much closer to the original human beings, the prototypical human beings. And so there would be much less genetic mutational load in the human genome. We're copies of copies of copies all the way to the beginning. And so every new generation of human beings is going to be carrying is going to be carrying more mutational load. And when we talk about mutational load, what we're talking about is deleterious mutations, negative mutations that break us down. And so if you reverse that process and you retrograde back in through time, then you're getting less and less and less mutations in the genome, going all the way back to the original genetic code, Adam, and which was flawless. So it makes sense that human beings are becoming weaker and are becoming overly burdened, genetically speaking, with these mutations as time goes on, increasingly burdened rather as time goes on, which leads to all kinds of disease, which leads to all manner of ailments. And the only reason why today our lifespans are slowly increasing in some quarters is because of technology. We have a facade of fitness that is sustained by technological props. And what I mean by that is we have all kinds of medical interventions that are keeping us alive longer, that are bolstering the human populace in terms of our life expectancy, where if you were to kick these technological props out from under us, the human populace would collapse. All the people who are on insulin, all the people who have evaded cancer because of medical interventions, and heart disease and all these things, these people would just die. And all of these things have increased: cancer, heart disease, diabetes. It's all increased, and not just in the West, all over the world. And in fact, not just in human beings, in animals as well. So we are undergoing a process. We are subject to the force of entropy. We are undergoing a process of devolution, degeneration. We're not evolving, we are devolving, and have been for thousands of years. And, I believe that our genetic clock is expiring. And in fact, I'm kind of launching us into, I know I'm getting away from your question, but I believe that, rather, it's not that I believe, it's scientists have conducted some tests regarding, I don't know if you've seen this in recent years, regarding the male sperm count worldwide, especially in the West. And they're raising the alarm that the sperm count is going to go to 0 by 2045. 0. That means that the human species is going to be reproductively inviable. We're not going to be able to reproduce naturally anymore. And this kind of, gets into the transhumanism and posthumanism and all of that. But I say that just to highlight the idea that the further we progress in time, the more we degrade, genetically speaking, the more degeneration and mutational load we carry as a species. And so if you go all the way back in time, you get to the original progenitors, and we should expect them to be living extremely long lifespans. These are the prototypical human beings, and we're much more capable and grand than we are today in every way, in their physical bodies, in their intellectual capacity. I believe even, and this is just sort of a curveball, but I believe that the human species is inherently telepathic. I believe that we are a telepathic species, but we've lost the capability over time. And there's other capabilities I think that we've lost because of genetic degeneration.
Well, that's a really important question, that genetic deterioration over the course of thousands of years. I mean, is that where we get to the idea of this kind of like deep state, or this kind of negative association of extraterrestrials or kind of like satanic leaders that have been doing everything they can to kind of like dumb down the human genome so that we live shorter and shorter lives? Because as you said, in that antediluvian era, humans could live for up to 1,000 years. So ever since that time, and as that kind of like diagram that I think we just had up, I'll just put it up again, shows. I mean, it just shows the incredible kind of like shortening, from the kind of pre-flood figures. You can see Noah there in the middle. There he lives to 900, and then there's this rapid decline. So it does suggest that something was behind this degradation. And so I mean, is this where we have the deep state, the satanic forces kind of like conspiring to make humans, and it makes sense. I mean, a population is easier to control if they live for like 70 years as opposed to 700 years.
I would say that the project of, let's just call them the Luciferian elite, their project is eternal life. They want to increase their own lifespans. They want to, through directed evolution, to evolve out of Adam, so to speak, into a post-human condition, and by doing so evade death. I think that's the primary concern. That is the all-consuming desire by these people, is to evade death, to cheat death. But also these people are working to construct a global technocratic system of control, in which human beings are every aspect of our lives and of our biology and of our finances. Everything we do is controlled, is not only controlled but extremely heavily manipulated. And that's really the great danger right now. Is the architecture that's being put into place through new technologies, artificial intelligence, for example. It's an architecture of technocratic totalitarian control. and I believe that one of the objectives is going to be to reduce the population, the human population, to somewhere around under 1 billion, perhaps even 500 million, I think is what it said on the Georgia Guidestones, to reduce the population. And the reason why they want to reduce the population, it isn't really for climate change, it's more about totalitarian control, is because human beings are no longer needed. They don't need us anymore. See, the elite, the ruling elite, we can call them globalists, even going back a couple hundred years, they needed the human populace to work in the factories during the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution needed, it required human effort. We had the mechanization of agriculture and in all kinds of different industries, but that mechanization still required human effort. It still required human beings to feed the machines. It still required human beings to work in the factory lines. And it required a lot of human beings, actually. And so the effort at that time was to get as many people into that workforce as possible to produce as many products and make as much money. But the fourth industrial revolution, as Klaus Schwab styles it, the revolution that's coming and indeed that has already begun, is going to not require nearly as many human beings. It is going to be a revolution that is primarily driven by robotics and artificial intelligence. In other words, everything is going to be automated. And so human beings are truly going to become, in the eyes of the technocrats, useless eaters, useless consumers of the resources of the earth. And they don't have any use for so many human beings on the earth. And so I believe that there's certainly, and this goes beyond shortening our lifespans, this is about eliminating a large percentage of the human populace off of the planet, because most of the menial jobs, and even a lot of the white collar jobs, are going to be in the next decade replaced by artificial intelligence. And we're seeing this happen right now, the rise of Chat GPT and of the artificial intelligence that is already able to replace so many jobs. For example, I do a lot of video editing, and I've been watching videos online that have been being passed around of artificial intelligence, for like this conversation we're having right now, would have no problem editing this conversation and doing it in 30 seconds or a minute or something like that, a task that would take several hours for us. So even in the creative space, artificial intelligence is already, I'm watching people who are taking advantage of Chat GPT, and they're going on there and they're sort of hacking the artificial intelligence, and they're producing books on all kinds of different subjects. They're not producing it. They're just prompting the artificial intelligence to do it. And in fact, there's codes that you can download. There's applications you can download on your phone. You plug these applications in with keywords, and you can literally start pumping books out. Well-written books on a variety of subjects, getting them done in a matter of hours. And of course, artificial intelligence is not so good yet to where it doesn't make any mistakes. The humans have to go in and double check and sort of do a proofreading, but that will change in the future. Artificial intelligence will be able to write flawless books, flawless movie scripts. In fact, right now, I believe that AI can create entire movies by itself. Of course, generating photorealistic 3D animations, but it can replicate and mimic human creativity, entertainment, music. As I said, a lot of the white collar jobs, trading on Wall Street, that's going to be gone. That'll be given over to artificial intelligence. Even obviously the factories, which are switching over to robotics and automation, your local grocery store, all of us are seeing less and less human beings working in the grocery store. The first there's an automated McDonald's out there. It's just, in a few years, all of the fast food restaurants will be automated. The only human beings who will be interacting in the grocery stores and in terms of the employees and in the fast food restaurants will be the engineers who are able to who do maintenance on the artificial intelligence, on the software and the hardware systems that are in play. So we're already seeing this revolution take place, and it's going to knock all kinds of people out of the job market. And so you're going to get to a situation in the next 5 years, certainly in 10 years, in which you're going to have a universal income, because their jobs are going to be taken by artificial intelligence, and a massive reduction of the population, because why have all these all of these useless eaters around? And certainly this is not happening by happenstance. A lot of this is being controlled and molded by, again, these individuals who I would describe as the technocratic totalitarian elite, or totalitarian technocratic elite, the people who are envisioning this future. And they think they're the good guys, of course. They think that they are operating, they're acting in the best interest of the planet and of the species. And here's the question, and I don't know what your thoughts are about this, Michael, but are these individuals, these technocratic elite, are they, some of them at the highest levels, are they in contact and perhaps even in league with certain extraterrestrial factions? Now, that's, to me, a very intriguing question.
Yeah, well, I think the answer to that is a resounding yes. I think two books that impressed me when I first got involved in the kind of this UFO exopolitics field was Gods of Eden by William Bramley, and Jim Ma's book Rule by Secrecy, and both of them traced out this kind of long history of human manipulation by these figures pulling the strings behind the scene, and they identified them as extraterrestrials. So definitely, I think the extraterrestrial manipulation has been happening a long time, and I think this is where the historical aspect comes in, that was what brought down this Atlantean civilization, that kind of extraterrestrial manipulation, because you did have a golden age in this kind of like antediluvial world, where at some point there was some kind of, humans were long-lived, that they were in harmony, some kind of harmony, and then it was during the time of Jared where you had the fallen angels appear. So that's when this corruption came in. And those that talk about Atlantis, whether we're talking about Edgar Cayce, say the same thing, that Atlantis was a very positive human experiment up until a certain point, and he described them as the sons of Belial. But the same process, the degradation, the human experimentation with genetics, the chimera, and we're witnessing that the same phenomenon. So literally, are we just going through the same process that led to the destruction of the antediluvial world?
I think we are. I think I call it Genesis 6 2.0. I think we are, to some extent, going to see a reemergence, by the way, of the antediluvian world order, the old world order. Because the new world order isn't about bringing about something new. It's about resurrecting the dead. It's about recreating this antediluvian order that existed during the golden age, in which the gods walk openly among men. And the gods, of course, would be these extraterrestrial entities. And so, it's difficult to imagine for me when I think about all of the things that are unfolding. Let's say all of these ideas that are coming down from on high. And when I say on high, I'm talking about this network of globalists. The World Economic Forum is one of these organizations, that everything they want to do is so dehumanizing. It's so dehumanizing. Of course, the famous, let them eat bugs, basically, scenario that's unfolding. They want us to eat insects. They want us to. There are some of these individuals who are advocating for indefinite lockdowns. That human beings would have to spend most of the time indoors and not having much contact with each other. Why? Not for a virus, but to save the planet from climate change. These are all inhuman ideas, as far as I'm concerned. All of these ideas that are coming down seem to be purposely designed to break down the human society, to destroy psychologically the human being. And it's so easy to think, well, what kind of person would do this? And if you just kind of, and I'm not sure that this is the case, but I would, it's easy to me to imagine this scenario, to think it can't be human beings at the top who are contriving these things. It's got to be some sort of a extraterrestrial influence, because it's so alien what they want to do. It's so alien to me. It's so anti-human. Even just the whole transhumanist movement, it's all very much anti-human. And there's almost a disdain for the offspring of Adam, a disdain for the human species. They want to degrade us. They want to break apart our institutions. They want to destroy families. They want to degrade society, cause us to become deranged psychologically. And obviously, we're being bombarded constantly with manipulation and with propaganda. And it's just we're being saturated in this dehumanizing force that again, for me, it makes a whole lot of sense if the origin, the true origin, is non-human.
Well, I think that there is this non-human element, and I know in your book you kind of spend quite a bit of time going over the research of people like Dr. David Jacobs, John Matt, Bud Hopkins, describing the abduction phenomenon. And I mean that, especially the work of Bud Hopkins, his book, The Threat, I mean, that is describing a situation where this kind of, they're creating a new hybrid human species that, in his opinion, that these controllers want to kind of like replace human 1.0, I mean us, with this with these hubrids. So again, this has the uncanny parallels with the pre-diluvial, antediluvial world. So is this, in your view, what's happening right now, that the hubrids are being created to replace humans?
Yes, I do think that that's happening. And the threat was written by Dr. David Jacobs, but Bud Hopkins sort of really kicked all of this off with his book Missing Time, which was which kind of began to kick the doors open on the abduction phenomenon. And of course, both Hopkins and Jacobs and Carla Turner, the late Carla Turner, who a lot of people forget about, but the late Carla Turner, they all were raising the alarm about this program of hybridization that seemed to be underway. And obviously, when you read their material and when you talk to abductees, this is being carried out by the Greys and the insectolins, as Jacobs denominates them. And certainly, I believe that I would concur with Jacobs' analysis, his final analysis on what their end game is. And he says that the end game of the Greys, from his perspective, is planetary acquisition, that they are taking over by stealth. And who knows what the ultimate objective of the hubrids is, of the advanced alien human hybrids really is. Is it to move up the echelons of human society? Is it to climb the ladder of industry, of the militaries around the world, the political systems? Do they want these hubrids ultimately placed at the pinnacle of political and military and industrial power? And if so, for what end? And again, I would say planetary acquisition, it's conquest by stealth. It's a covert conquest rather than overt. And everything the Greys do is clandestine. And that's something that Jacobs would always emphasize, is that the project is clandestine. And the Greys certainly are responsible for the abduction phenomenon and are up to no good, to say the very least, and do constitute a threat.
So we know the Greys, the insectoids, and reptilians, as others have referred to them, are this association or alliance of extraterrestrials that people like Hopkins and Jacobs have referred to as being involved in abductions and being part of this kind of creation of a hybrid race to replace us. And David Jacobs definitely paints the most alarmist picture, and Bud Hopkins too. I remember reading his books, and they both paint alarming pictures of where we're going. Now, of course, David Jacobs is retired. Bud Hopkins has passed on.
Mhm.
Now, I know that there's been a lot of more recent contactees who have come forward talking about their experiences with these beautiful human-looking extraterrestrials, typically described as Nordics, that are working with governments. So, are we talking about the same faction that previously worked with, say, people like Enoch in the Antediluvial World?
Now, I would say that from my perspective, and this is what I write in the book, that this angelic faction that I denominate the elder race, they are the Nordics. That's my hypothesis, that these are the Nordics, and among the Nordic race, let's say, there are at least two different factions. There are, to simplify it, there are the good guys and the bad guys. And the good guys are working for the benefit of mankind, and the bad guys are working to the detriment and control and manipulation of mankind. And ultimately, their war is more with the good guys, the Elohim, let's say, the good Elohim, with the Son of God and the kingdom. And we're sort of you might say, a casualty in that war. We're in the way to some extent. So that's how I would break that down. So the Nordics would be the elder race, and then there's certainly the Greys, which are, the Gray Insectoid faction. I think there is something to the reptilian stuff, although I don't really know what to think about that. But I think we do have several factions in play. But I would caution people from just assuming that the Nordic faction in general is benevolent. I would say that we're looking at, we have to understand that within that faction are factions, within that race are factions rather, and nothing is as simplistic as we might think. I think it's very, very highly complex.
Yes, I would actually agree with that. That people do kind of like sometimes depict the Nordics as the good guys, but as you say, there are factions within the Nordics, and I know that the Germans, the Nazis, did work with a negative faction of Nordics that helped them develop a secret space program, and that the US Navy worked with a positive faction of the Nordics, which helped them build their space program. That's according to my research and the people that I've been working with, supporting that, this Nordic influence is very pertinent to our current exopolitical situation on the planet.
Now, I'm curious, and I know it's not my place to ask questions, but I'm just curious what your thoughts are regarding the Vril. Who do you think the Vril were? The Vril Society of the Nazis, and they were always looking to contact the Vril, who were allegedly this race of entities that lived under the ground.
Well, very interesting. I think that that there was some kind of underground civilization that the Nazis were involved with, and I think based on my research, they look at humans as kind of like genetically impure. They look at us as a very aggressive race, and they kind of keep a distance. And I think the Nazis wanted to make deals, and to a certain extent, they were able to establish some collaboration. And they did get some help from a kind of negative Nordic group. I mean, I know that, for example, Operation High Jump, the Germans down there weren't quite ready to tackle, the Navy armada, the naval armada that went down there. They had at least one, maybe two aircraft carrier battle groups that went down to take out the Nazi bases down there, and they were helped by this this negative Nordic group. So, whether they were part of this Vril underground society, because Vril itself just means a force. I mean, Edward Bulwer-Lytton just described Vril as a psychic force. But some underground civilizations learn how to harness it, and the Nazis were very interested in making contact and learning how to harness that themselves, so that they could develop these super weapons to win the war.
Yeah, it's very fascinating. I think one of the most intriguing things about the Nazis in this, all the lore surrounding Nazis and extraterrestrials is the Vril Society. I think they called them the Vril Maidens. Maria Orsic, I think, was one of the Vril Maidens, and that they would make contact with these entities through, let's say, through psychic means. And I always wondered, what exactly that implies, that they were attempting to make contact through psychic means, and if they did make contact, and I think that they did make contact with something, and were able to get schematics, because I think the story goes that they got like schematics, and I think even in Sumerian or something like that, or in the coded Templar a script or something like that through these psychic means. That's always intrigued me. But there's absolutely no question that the Nazis were obsessed with the occult. And also not just with the occult, but also trying to derive new technologies and weapons through contact with superior entities and even extraterrestrials. So it's hard for me, though, to parse fact from fiction. There's so many stories. It's sort of there are so many variations of these stories. But certainly, I think that in Project High Jump we encountered saucers, and who those saucers belong to. I don't believe if the Nazis had actually developed that kind of technology, I think they would have won the war. I think they were very close to developing that kind of technology, but obviously the Allied bombing campaigns put an end to that.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Nazis definitely had a technological advantage in terms of aerospace vehicles. I mean, they did develop, of course, the V1, V2 rockets.
Mm-hmm.
They developed jet engines,
long-range rockets.
They developed all of these, but they just, in the end, didn't develop them in sufficient quantities. And I think Hitler was kind of like outsmarted. I think British intelligence, I think kind of like used whatever techniques they could get to get him to make all these mistakes, like attacking Russia. I mean, if they didn't attack the Soviet Union, I mean, Nazi Germany would have won the war.
No question about it.
But they attacked the Soviets because apparently Hitler's astrologer told him that he'll achieve great success. So I think British intelligence or someone was able to kind of get the Nazis to make all these mistakes. And
Operation Barbarossa was the biggest blunder of that war, and thank God, because it had not Hitler directed his military, had not he opened up another front in the war, then I don't think we would have been able to defeat him. But the bombing campaigns too is what really threw him off guard. I don't think he expected that the Western powers, that the Allies would bomb non-military targets, firebomb Dresden, for example. I think that really surprised him. And another aspect of all of this is that one thing that the Nazis definitely were developing, but not fast enough and not soon enough, were deep underground military bases. And had they developed more of those sooner, you see this if you read Albert Speer's book, had they developed them sooner, they could have put most of their manufacturing underground. They could have put a lot of these weapons programs and a lot of their industry underground. And again, had they done that, I don't think we would have been able to defeat them. But we then came over in Operation Paperclip, and we took the architects, the engineers of these underground bases. They were called the Tote Organization that was building these underground bases. We took them back over to the United States, and guess what we did with them? We started to build our own deep underground military bases, and obviously still do to this day, with much greater efficiency and capability.
So in Birthright, you you show, or you kind of like describe this dynamic, which is a very interesting one, where you first describe the hubrids as being a national security problem. Then the world governments unite to fight the hybrids or the hubrids and the greys, and humanity starts losing the fight. And then another faction shows up to help us fight the hubrids and greys, and they're these beautiful human-looking saviors.
Mm-hmm.
But you say that these are the fallen angels pretending to help. So, is that a dynamic that you think is still going to happen?
Absolutely. I think that's why we're having the alien presence, let's say the disclosure of the alien presence, which is kind of being slow walked right now by the Pentagon. The context is a national security threat. Undoubtedly, it's a national security threat, and the Pentagon is very concerned about these craft that are pursuing our aircraft and our battleships and our aircraft carriers and are hovering above our secret military installations. You get the sense that the posture of the phenomenon is becoming more hostile, and I believe that the gray alien threat does constitute a national security threat. It constitutes a global threat, obviously, because not only are Americans abducted, but basically every culture around the earth is probably to some extent being abducted, at least a percentage of their populace. And so I believe that what we're going to see happen is exactly as you described, that at some point in the future, we are going to be, the general public is going to be made aware of the gray alien threat. And this is a threat for which we have no recourse, because their technology is far advanced to ours, and worse than that, they're already integrating with hybrids. And how do we find the hybrids? How do we identify them? That would be a very serious problem, and is a very serious problem for us. And so I believe that what's going to happen is, and I lay all of this out in the book, why I believe this is going to happen, but I believe that our quote-unquote extraterrestrial saviors are going to show up on the scene. And as you said, the contrast, the juxtaposition between these beautiful angelic beings and the grays and the grotesque grays and exotic insectolins, the juxtaposition is going to be startling, and they're going to deliver us from this threat. And there's a reason, I believe, why they're going to do this and what it's going to lead to, what it's going to precipitate on Earth. And as you rightly stated, I believe that this faction is going to be that shows up to save us. Is they're either going to be the Nordic faction, so in other words, the elder race, the angelic faction, or their hybrid offspring. And in my book, I postulate that the hybrid offspring of these entities, of these insurrectionary members of the elder race, that their offspring will, let's be more specific, the leader of that group, his offspring, his son, will be a hybrid, and that hybrid will be the individual that the writers of the New Testament describe as the son of perdition and the man of sin, who we know as the Antichrist, and that his name will be Apollo. And all of this, it seems like I'm just shooting from the hip here, but all of this is detailed in the book. Why people may disagree with me, but you'll see, at least if you read Birthright, why I draw these conclusions and how I see all of this shaping up. I believe that ultimately where we're headed is to a scenario that John in Revelation describes as Armageddon. And Armageddon is not a war with Israel. If you pay attention to the details of Armageddon in the book of Revelation, you'll understand that Armageddon is not just a geopolitical war against the nation of Israel. Rather, it's actually a conflict with God himself. And
Well, I know that there's been quite a bit written about that scenario. I remember reading, I think it was a good 10 years ago, Chris Putnam and Tom Horn's book, Exo Vaticana, where they kind of
Mhm.
described a very similar scenario to what you described. And the Vatican would actually work with this kind of like a group of extraterrestrials that would be human looking, and they would use that to establish this kind of new world order. And that was something that the Vatican has been planning for some time, and I think that that kind of to me makes sense that the Vatican, if they're involved in any kind of disclosure, that it would be part of this kind of false flag where you have these kind of like positive human-looking aliens, or these these beautiful-looking Nordic extraterrestrials who are in fact corrupt, or that they're part of a negative faction, kind of like teaming up with the Pope and with Vatican and whatever other world leaders want to work with them. And there was a book that came out in 1995 by this French Canadian journalist, Serge Monas, called Project Bluebeam, where he described that very scenario, that first there would be the invasion, and then there would
Hmm.
be salvation by this group of extraterrestrials, but that would all be
Wow.
part of this false flag narrative.
Wow, I had no idea that someone had written that narrative that definitively long before me. That's really intriguing. I'll have to get a hold of that book. But yeah, I do believe, and of course, this is a wild speculation on my part, but I do believe that the Vatican is anticipating the arrival of alien saviors, and that these alien saviors will look very much like us. They'll be the Nordic race, and there are indications, if you follow closely what the Holy See is doing in terms of theology. They have been for the last decade laying a theological foundation for the arrival of these extraterrestrials. And in fact, Guy Cosmonalgo was famous for going around, a Vatican astronomer, a Jesuit Vatican astronomer, going around talking about, yes, we will ultimately or possibly make contact with an extraterrestrial race, and this extraterrestrial race may be morally superior to us. We may baptize this race into the church, or this race may baptize us. And sort of this is very strange talk coming from a Jesuit, and you can see again, if you take a look at the theology that's being crafted by the Holy See, it is in anticipation of something, in anticipation of some kind of revelation that's coming, that's going to, in their mind, it's going to demand a reworking of traditional Christian theology. Not in my mind. In my mind, it's exactly what is predicted in the biblical narrative. But it would not surprise me at all. And again, this is wild speculation on my part, but it would not surprise me at all if the Vatican if members at the highest level at the Vatican were already in contact in some way, shape, and form with this extraterrestrial race. But again, at the very least, they're laying the theological foundation for their arrival.
Well, I don't doubt that members of the deep state, or this kind of like Luciferian global elite, that they are working with, or have been working with, negative extraterrestrials. But my research, I've been working with quite a number of people that have had contact or know of a positive association of extraterrestrials. And there was that Israeli professor, Professor Haim Eshed, who talked about the Galactic Federation. And so there are a number saying that this Galactic Federation are positive, that they're working with kind of like white hats and positive Earth militaries, an Earth alliance, to fight against the deep state. So, again, there are very clear parallels with the Book of Enoch, because the Book of Enoch described a similar war, in the heavens and kind of like on the earth.
Right. And you'll recall that in the Book of Enoch, Watchers, who we discussed last time, who I believe these are members of the elder race. These are high, let's say, high-ranking members of the elder race. They're part of this council, this divine council. These Watchers. It was from this faction that you got these malevolent beings who came down to the earth. It was an act of treason, let's call it, against the kingdom of heaven. They come down to the earth, but they're from this same faction, from the Watchers, and they began to do the things that they had decided to do, and the things we discussed last time, the progeneration of hybrid offspring with the daughters of men, and the exchange of technology, of knowledge and technology for these daughters' hands in marriage by their fathers and so forth. But we have to keep in mind, this is the same faction. So you have loyal members of this faction, and you have the disloyal members of this faction, the faithful and the rebellious, but the same faction, the same. Let's put it in these terms: the same species, right? The good guys and the bad guys, who are operating. Both of them are operating on Earth to some degree. In the Book of Daniel, for example, we have the Watcher designation. The Watcher designation is not entirely extra-biblical. You actually find it in the Book of Daniel. And in the Book of Daniel, you have this council of Watchers who are presiding over the judgment of Nebuchadnezzar. And they determine, this council of Watchers, that Nebuchadnezzar is going to be struck with the mind of a beast. He's going to be given the mind of a beast, and he's going to eat grass like a cow, basically, like a steer for 3 years. This is a judgment that comes from the Watchers. So the Watchers of heaven are directly interacting, even in a political sense, on earth. And this is coming from the good guys in the biblical narrative, that this is a judgment on Nebuchadnezzar. So yes, you have two factions, even coming from a biblical worldview within the biblical narrative. You have two factions of the same. Again, let's use the term race, the same race of beings that are operating on earth, one for the benefit of mankind and one to the detriment of mankind, one as faithful operatives and agents of the kingdom of heaven, and others as apostate sons and rebels and enemies of the kingdom of heaven and enemies of God. This is the narrative, and this is a terrestrial and extraterrestrial conflict that, again, according to the biblical narrative, has been ensuing for many thousands of years.
So, I mean, at this point in history, I mean, it sounds, I mean, from the book, I did come away, from reading it, that it was kind of like, it was like there wasn't all that much to look forward to, with the kind of like advent of transhumanism and the implementation of this human 2.0 agenda, and people being driven away from the best jobs because of kind of all of the AI and all of that. But maybe because the sources that I've been working with have been kind of like giving me information that this positive grouping of extraterrestrials, the elders, the positive faction of elders, or the Galactic Federation of Worlds, however you want to describe them, that they are more successful than in the kind of like antediluvial world, where Plato describes it, that Atlantis sank into the abyss because they embarked on imperialism. Whereas now, if we look at our kind of planetary civilization, I mean, there have been attempts to engineer a world war, I mean, in Ukraine and against China, that the deep state, it's quite clear that's what they're trying to do. But there are enough, awake and aware humans that are saying no to this. And because we are saying no, I think that the positive extraterrestrials, or the positive, the Watchers or the faction, that they are looking at this and they're saying, well, humanity is saying no to that negative agenda, so we can help them more. And the more they help us, the more likely that we are going to emerge into a future that's going to be one where, rather than the negative extraterrestrials triumphing with their agenda, the positive faction will emerge and give us an opportunity to deal with this kind of whole AI situation.
Well, if you read the Book of Revelation, you'll see that all hell breaks loose on Earth. And there's all kinds of things happening that are obviously very negative and bleak. And there's the Earth is just ensconced in darkness and death and plague and all of this. And of course, the rise of the beast, who's going to be the ultimate tyrant, the greatest tyrant the Earth has ever seen. But at the end of all of this, you have the most triumphal scene you could possibly imagine. And I referenced it before, Armageddon, in which the King of Heaven and his armies descend upon the earth and to vanquish the beast, to vanquish this tyrannical this tyrannical empire that's oppressing humanity and indeed destroying humanity. That the Son of God appears and he vanquishes these enemies and ultimately is victorious for the human race. Because that's, if you read, my book, the premise, the theological premise in the beginning of the book is that we were created, the human species was created to govern the earth, and we lose and that authority to govern the earth, dominion of the earth, is the birthright of mankind. That's why my book is called Birthright. And we were bequeathed the title deed of the earth to govern it according to the kingdom of heaven, to be the vice regents of the king, and that authority that's invested in us as human beings is directly associated, is innately connected to our genome, to our being human. We are the offspring of Adam, and that's why the Son of God became a man. He became a man to redeem mankind. He became a son of Adam to redeem, to reconcile, and restore the offspring of Adam back into the family of God. Because that's really the biblical narrative. It's about mankind who was divorced from the family of God, who was sundered from the family of God, going back into the family through Christ. And I can't think of any better story, any happier ending than the Son of God, who is a man now, who was born into the world in the lineage of Adam through David, returning to the earth to reconquer, to take back the earth for the offspring of Adam, and to restore mankind to the family of God, where he was supposed to be in the beginning. I mean, I think that is the most spectacular, epic story ever told, ever written, is the gospel of Christ. And so you talk about, yes, things will get very dark and will get very bleak on the earth, but according to the biblical narrative, according to the, especially in the book of Revelation, it's like it's like the Lord of the Rings, and everything looks bleak in his building to this final battle at Minas Tirith, and these hideous entities assaulting the walls of Minas Tirith, and it looks like all hope is lost. But then suddenly the battle is won and victory is snatched from the jaws of defeat. That's very much what the biblical narrative is, and it's very much the story that is portrayed. And so, coming from a biblical worldview, I would say that my perspective, the end game from my perspective, is the most glorious, as I said, spectacular, hopeful, wonderful outcome you could possibly imagine. It's the sons and daughters of Adam being redeemed and then reconciled back to God, back to the Father, and then brought back into the family and restored. Everything that was lost in Adam is regained in the Son of God and Jesus of Nazareth. So that is the happiest of happy endings that I could possibly envision.
Okay, well, that's kind of like not all that different to the kind of conclusions I've reached from kind of like my work with different contactees associated with these positive extraterrestrial groups who are describing something very similar to what you've just explained, that there is this process, but at the end of the process, it's going to be a very happy outcome when all the dark agenda is exposed and humanity is liberated. But we're in the process, and this is a very dark time. But the overriding kind of idea here is not to lose hope, and to just do whatever it is. I mean, I know you as a Christian, and I would recommend to anyone from any faith that this is a good time to connect with your faith, or connect with something that makes you more aware of that kind of transcendent element within you, so that that helps expedite this process. So Timothy, where can people get Birthright, and where do they go to kind of learn more about you?
You can get Birthright on Amazon.com, or Walmart.com, on BarnesandNoble.com. You can track with me. My website is TimothyAlberino.com. My YouTube channel, I put a lot of content on there. It's just my name, Timothy Alberino. Social media, my name, Timothy Alberino. And so no spaces or dots or underscores or anything between my first and last name on Instagram and Twitter. But I have a mailing list. People can sign up to my mailing list. I'm always doing trips. I do expeditions. I'm doing one in Peru in June, and then I'm doing a conference in Costa Rica in February. So I've always got events going on if people are interested in those. But yeah, the book you can get on Amazon. Probably Amazon's the easiest for people.
Well, definitely worth reading. I did enjoy reading it. A lot of a wealth of information. And I want to thank you, Timothy, for coming on Exopolitics today.
Thank you very much, Michael. My pleasure.
You have been listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Join or start a conversation in the comments. Take the time to explore the vast library of best-selling books, webinars, and podcasts by Dr. Salla. Visit exopoliticstoday.com.